March 1732, and Leeds is suffering from the most brutal winter anyone can recall. The rolls of the dead grow longer, the wealthy hoard their money and power, and the poor struggle just to survive. Richard Nottingham, constable of the city of Leeds, is lost in grief for the death of his daughter, taken by the bitter cold. But the discovery of the corpse of a wealthy wool merchant, his throat cut and the skin stripped from his back, drags him harshly into the present. Why would a killer want the man's flesh? That's what Nottingham can't comprehend. But when he does discover the gruesome answer, it hurls him up against a killer determined to settle old scores. Even as Winter claims more victims and Nottingham and his family try to piece together their shattered lives, the constable and his men desperately chase a ruthless murderer. Alone, Sedgwick listened to the city outside the walls. There was the creak of carts as they turned from Briggate onto Curgate, conversations of people passing like the soft drone of bees. It seemed as if the city was beginning to come alive once more, a gradual rousing as the snow started to disappear. After shivering and freezing and false starts, the fresh hope of spring was welcome. There'd been so much death in the last months. Among the worst he'd seen were the twins, pretty girls no more than a month old, swaddled in old stained linen and left out in a doorway with a note saying, "I have no money, I have no food, I have no milk." The babes were already dead when he found them, their flesh chilled and waxy against his fingers. For the first time since he'd taken this job, he'd cried. For so many, the weather had meant no work and no money. They'd starved, trying to scavenge grass and roots from under the snow wherever they could. He'd seen men begging and pleading for something to eat for their families. But the memory that stood out from all others had come in January, when the cold was deepest. An infant, barely old enough to walk and talk, had been toddling down the street, stumbling in the ice, falling and then standing again. He was dressed in a shirt that was too large for him and breeches with no coat, his thin shoes soaked and full of holes. When Sedgwick had asked where he lived, the boy had lifted one small fist. His knuckles white from the strain of grasping it tight, he produced a small piece of metal, rubbed shiny by years of use. It was a sign to hang over a bottle's neck, reading, "Ale." "Mama gave me," he said proudly. "My name, Hungry." The boy had no idea where he lived or who his mother was. All he owned was this worthless piece of tin with a word stamped on it. Sedgwick had found the lad at home, but if he hadn't, he'd have taken him back with him, a younger brother for James. Within a day, frostbite started to blacken the boy's toes and fingers. Inside a week he had died, his screaming hoarse and terrified. The pictures were trickling through his memory when the door of the jail opened and a clerk from the moot hall entered. He was a small man with an ungainly limp where a broken leg had once been badly set. He nodded briefly, took off his battered tricorn hat, and in a friendly tone said, "Still getting a bit warmer. Haven't we seen the last of all this, eh?" "Maybe," the deputy agreed cautiously. He'd seen the man before, always ready with gossip or a lengthy joke in the ship. "Mr. Nottingham here?" "He had some things to do," Sedgwick lied. "The boss didn't need what had happened bandied around. I don't think he'll be back today." The man shrugged. "Tell him his worship wants to see him. Nothing too urgent. It's about the Henderson brothers." He rolled his eyes. "Be better if they just hung the pair of 'em, but you never heard that from me," he added hurriedly. Sedgwick grinned and the other man turned to leave. "You got money in this city, you can do anything." "We keep trying," the deputy said. "You can't fight wealth," the man told him with a shake of his head, as if the words had been written by the church. And they might as well have been, Sedgwick reflected as the man closed the door. Money did what he wanted and walked roughshod over everything else. It didn't care what bones it broke or the injuries it left.